Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources podcast, the BERcast. Today's episode, we're going to be talking with a couple of Bear Raider colleagues about their experience with the Energy Star version 3.2 program and check out what is new in revision 14 and version 3.3. So, Sandy, here it is. We're recording this podcast, and you might have noticed my swag style. I'm back repping BR. I'm not repping my favorite football team. Oh, rough weekend, man.
If you noticed, I didn't even text you this weekend because I knew it was a
I know. Sandy is usually he's always building up my confidence with the Lions, pulling it off and doing great things. It was a Black Sabbath for me, waking up after a dismal Saturday here in the Motor City. That's a shame. We'll rap a little bit about that in segment 3. But how are you doing? You all right after this weekend? Are you doing fine?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, my team is not even close to the playoffs, but it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting week of playoffs. A lot of snow games, kind of like harkening back to the days of old when we used to get a lot of games like that. And a lot of the teams that were in the playoffs this year are outdoor and getting snow. So it made it for interesting football, sloppy, but interesting.
Yeah, I like that Bills Ravens game. You knew that was going to be a good game, and it proved to be so. Well, and then we had Monday, and one of the more ironic things in history, we had Donald Trump taking the Oval Office, inaugurated as our president on Martin Luther King Day. Kind of an interesting day, kind of smash up of perhaps two different philosophies, perhaps. And coming out of that day, a lot of big signings from executive orders. Nothing that necessarily immediately punched our industry in the face, but I'd say a lot of things are along the fringes, perhaps, that might be signaling. Number one, we're not the Paris Climate Accords anymore. We're out of that again. And drilling in the Arctic is a priority again. And so, those then in a big hand gesture seen around the world from the world's richest man. Those are about the only really meaningful takeaways from yesterday. Did you have anything that caught your eye?
A lot of pardons.
A lot of pardons.
That list was amazing, and Biden pardons the whole family, and Fauci and a whole bunch of the people who were prosecuting Trump. They were called preemptive pardons, which I found to be humorous. I was a little surprised that he did that like that. I thought he would do it ahead of time. I didn't think it was going to come an hour before the inauguration. And I have mixed views on the whole pardon thing. Some ways I think the president should have those powers, but I think it could be used wrongly. The verdict's not out. I mean, there's so many different stories and reports and who did what and who. I thought Fauci was an interesting one because there's been a lot of backlash to a lot of that stuff that happened at NIH. And I thought that was kind of a bold pardon, considering depending on which side of that argument you're on. I don't really know what side is right because I'm not a scientist, but I thought that was interesting. And I thought that a lot of the prosecutors that were pardoned was interesting. But I think there was the only mention I heard in US. I didn't get to watch it until after work. I'm a working man. But he did mention the Green New Deal, which I thought was interesting. But there was no direct executive orders after that because I went through the whole list really affecting our industry at this point. So it remains to be seen. You have your naysayers, and then you have the guys like me that think that there's really not going to be a giant effect. I was reading some interesting information over the weekend preparation for this, and I think one of the stats I read was amazing. It was like just going to the 2021 IACC backstop for HUD and FHA, it's like almost $26,000 over a 30-year mortgage and savings alone. That's a lot of money. Hard to really detract from that. Another stat I read from an interview with John Pass, for like every $100 Energy Star spends, $5,240 some dollars or something like that, if I remember that correctly, in savings are represented by that $100. I mean, that's an ROI that's incredible. So I think I go back to my old argument of the last time this happened. everybody was like, oh my God, doom and doom. And nothing really changed. And I think that these programs, especially the 45L, I've heard a lot of stuff about the builders are against it. I'm not so sure, but I don't see a wind to change in our business. If I was in regular, I mean, he stopped, one of the executive orders was he stopped all regulatory things being approved by everyone. All regulatory stuff was stopped. So no more regulations basically by anybody that's in the government can be issued until there's a moratorium on that. So I think, like I said a couple of podcasts ago, I think regulatory might see some pretty steep action. I'm not so sure about what affects us in our industry.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. Pardons all around. January 6th pardons, Biden family pardons.
Crazy.
Well, one thing that also that Biden ended up getting done before he ended up leaving office that does impact our industry. We talked a couple of episodes ago about what was going to happen with the other IRA related programs. We're very focused in this industry about new homes and 45L. But what about those home energy rebates, the homes and the high efficiency electric appliance rebate program? What was going to happen with those? And if the last time we took a look at it, there was a lot of states that had submitted their application, but they hadn't yet kind of gotten the money. And there was a suggestion by a previous guest that, in fact, that money kind of might get crawled back if it's not spent. Well, take a look, Sandy. Updated map. Funds awarded.
Yeah.
Gold all around. So basically, the way this looks is, to me, is that other than South Dakota that just said they didn't want the money at all, every state that had submitted a form of an application got the money.
Yep. And that money was in escrow anyway, so it can't be taken back. And so, yeah, no, it's exciting. That's really exciting news.
Well, the implication for this, for again, people who maybe don't know too much about the IRA and what it means, I think there's a lot of sort of misinformation out there about what the IRA has and what it doesn't. But what it has in it is provisions to help principally low to moderate income households, which includes homeowners as well as renters, as well as for multifamily projects where the owner of the building wants to invest in energy efficiency or electrification upgrades to their properties. And so we've got about 10 states that already have programs up and running to some degree. Now, I'll just go ahead and say, being from one of those states, Michigan, the program has launched, but it really isn't available yet. They're still kind of working on the rules of the road. I checked out North Carolina and Georgia, and it didn't really look to me like their programs were fully available, but they're coming closer to fruition. Hopefully that means the rest of these states start to catch up too, because I'll say my family, my parents invested into some small multifamily buildings in Detroit back in the 1970s and 80s. And these are old buildings, 1890s, 1900s era buildings. And so they don't have a stitch insulation or air sealing or anything like that. They're very leaky buildings. And so I am very much interested in potentially taking advantage of some of these incentives, because a lot of my tenants are what you would consider to be maybe not low income, but certainly moderate income, meeting less than 150% AMI. And so there's the potential that I can unlock some very significant savings through these rebates in order to go and do things like do air sealing and blow the insulated, the attic full insulation. And as a building owner, I may even consider things like adding heat pumps to these apartments, because right now we have full building furnaces. As the owner, we're paying the heat, and the tenants they're not entirely satisfied with the heat. People on the lower floors are overheated, and people on the upper floors are feeling too cold. So it's constantly this battle. They don't really have dedicated air conditioning. People are just hanging window units off the side of the building, and that's not really good for the durability of the building. Just be putting a bunch of condensate on the side of the walls. So I'm kind of excited about the prospects of potentially taking advantage of this. And I hope that the whole country can make good use of these funds. I think it's easy to be cynical about government spending and just say, it's a big waste of money. I'll say, no, we've talked about this. Was this the right approach? Was it making every state apply and go through their individual Byzantine policy issues and legal processes and on a state level? Was that the best way to do it? Or should they have just administered it at a federal level? Sandy, I don't know, maybe at this point, maybe it was for the best that it's in the hands of the states because now it can't be sort of punched down on. What do you think?
I don't know, man. I still stick to my guns. I think that there should have been mandatory requirements in the state. I still think it should be pushed down to the states to manage and run, but I think there should have been a set of parameters involved in it. So in
One
order
program. They take one program. Everybody does the one program. I hear you. I don't
and now
disagree.
it's the same across the board. And I mean, if you look at the target audiences, yeah, a lot of these people are individual homeowners, right? But then there's a lot of people that own multiple properties in multiple states. It would have been much easier to adhere to it. They would already understand it. I mean, I think there's a lot of advantages to that. So I still kind of stick with my original thought. I think it should have been a set of parameters for the programs. They should have been rolled down to the states, and they have to accept those parameters in order to get the money. But other than that, I think it's going to be fine. I mean, it's exciting to know that all these states have been funded now, except for South Dakota, who didn't want the money. And I think that it's great for our industry because there's a lot of opportunity, both on the retrofit side and the new homes. Not so much the new home side, but the retrofit side, upgrades, multifamily. And I think it's going to upgrade our building stock in a tremendous way. And that's the greatest part of the whole thing.
Yeah, let's just take a look at this. So Michigan got about $211 million. And that's for the whole thing. So that includes some administration. But let's just say that out of that 211 million, that every house that participates is going to end up getting about $10,000 worth of stuff. So that's including admin. That's a little bit over 21,000 households that could end up getting something out of this. And it's not going to change everything for everybody, but that could make a really big dent, especially since these funds really are focused more to low and moderate income type of properties. And so I'm definitely optimistic. I will say we have to get the show on the road here, folks. It's great that the money is basically in people's accounts here at the state level, but we need real programs that people can work with. I've been reaching out to the state of Michigan about their program, and it's still very much like we'll have it done in another couple months, and then a couple months, then it's going to be a couple more months. And I think we do run the risk here. This money, these programs are only really supposed to last until, what is it, 2031 or something like that. And so the times now, it's 2025. It's time to get these things going. It would be nice for at least 5 years in earnest, or else I think then we can criticize it as potentially not necessarily have been the most beneficial administrative rollout possibly. So
agreed.
But for our building performance folks, not just HERS raters, but those who care about improving the built environment all around, it looks like we're going to have a lot of green opportunities here before too terribly long through the homes and here programs. So we're going to keep the news segment a little bit brief here because we got plenty of things to talk about in our guest segment 2, right now. So rolling into segment 2 here, our guest segment, and we're going to be talking with some BER rater colleagues that are operating really across the United States in terms of their experience with the move towards the Energy Star version 3.2 program. We've got Ben Cohen with ReVireo and Erik Henson with Midwest Energy Consultants. How's it going, Erik? How are you?
Good. Very good. Kind of a little chilly here today, but we got the Chiefs going forward, so that keeps me warm.
Yeah, hold that football talk until we get to segment number 3. Y'all can join here. Sharing my shame here as a Lions fan. But all right, Ben, how about yourself? How you doing?
Doing good. Previous call, I heard I'm not the coldest person in the room at 9 degrees. I hear we got people colder, so I Can't complain.
I think Eric, you take the trophy for right now. You said -7. I'm at
-7.
6, and then Matt Rosendaul down there in good old Tennessee. What are you at, buddy?
It was 7 this morning, but it's 11 now. Nice balmy 11. So
Sadie, the
yeah,
the
we're
palm
getting,
trees are they?
I don't want to make you guys feel bad, man. It's like 54.
Okay, well, anyways, we were going to record this last week, but then it's both Sandman and myself ended up getting a little bit under the weather, so we just decided to punt for a week. It turns out that was a good thing for 2 reasons. Number one, having recorded last week, I haven't been showing up to the podcast, bragging up the Lions again and talking all this type of stuff, but obviously I'm a little bit more humble this week when it comes to that. We won't spend the whole episode talking about the Lions, but we will talk about it in segment 3. But more importantly than that is the release of some important programmatic updates from the EPA Energy Star Homes team. The major update that came out from the program was the release of version 3.3 of the national version of Energy Star Homes program, as well as 1.3 of multifamily new construction. But I would say maybe even just as important, or maybe even more important, was the release of Rev 14 of the existing program documents. And for those who are maybe in the building performance industry but don't live and die in these federal new homes programs, the big takeaway here is 2 things. For Rev 14, there are some very fundamental changes to how the Energy Star New Homes program intends to function, and some pretty big modifications to checklist requirements as a result of this revision. And we're going to dive into exactly what those mean in practicality. But aside from revision 14, version 3.3 kind of, in my opinion, addresses potentially some of the concerns that a lot of builders have had with version 2 of Energy Star, particularly as it pertains to the building thermal onflow. For those who don't follow the politics of energy codes, suffice it to say the 2021 IECC and how it was developed was somewhat contentious, and some people believe that some of the insulation measures that were included in that version of the code were not particularly cost effective. Things like R60 insulation in attics in colder climates, and really kind of improving across the board the thermal envelope performance. Obviously, I'm a passive house guy. I was just last week teaching a passive house verifier class, so I'm a big fan of more robust building enclosures. I think that they keep people comfortable, they keep energy loads low, so as to protect the grid in case of extreme temperatures like what we have today. They can promote resilience so that if for some reason in this really cold weather, people lose their power, all of a sudden maybe they're feeling still comfortable enough and survivability goes up in their homes. But regardless of that, hey, we all know home building, it's a business. And so home builders were disinclined in many ways towards version 3.2 because it required full alignment with the thermal enclosure from the 2021 IECC, which was a little bit different because historically version 3.0, 3.1 had a thermal backstop trade-off option, so that if builders didn't want to necessarily comply entirely with the full-fledged UA trade-off of the sort of the concomitant energy code, they were able to basically have a little bit of reduction there for some trade-offs. That comes back with version 3.3. And there's a couple other things I think are meaningful, but that's what we're here to discuss. I'm glad we kind of punted for a week. Sandy, I'm going to kick it off with you, maybe just sort of broad brush. What's your biggest takeaway, or what's, if any, one thing that you're kind of either excited about or you think is really going to be the needle mover about these policy changes from the EPA? What do you think they are?
I mean, I think I'm excited the fact that they're going to go to the 2024 IACC backstop. I think the only way we're going to continually progress this program and to continue to save energy is to keep doing that. We were stuck for a long period of time without a lot of movement there. I would say the second thing is probably the trade-offs coming back. I think that that's a big part of compliance, especially with production builders, being able to trade things off. I think that has a big effect on the viability of the program. But I would say that's my two biggest takeaways. And I would say third would probably be the checklist. Whittling down the checklist a little bit, making it more sensible, I think makes a lot of sense. So that would be my three big takeaways on 3.3 at this point.
Yeah. So looking at the checklists have gotten a little bit smaller, radically smaller. It's been length in some ways, but it's more about some of the substantive changes that basically things that went away in a lot of ways. Reduced thermal bridging, they're not mandatory anymore. They're sort of recommended, and they're supposed to be sort of captured accurately in the energy modeling, whether or not they're done or not. And then there's some other meaningful things here. Maybe that air barriers and air sealing got reduced a little bit in exchange for a mandatory air tightness provision. So, Ben, I'm going to maybe come over to you. For you looking at this and seeing a modification to the national checklist, and just to be clear, the checklists end up basically sustaining throughout whatever program version you're working in. So version 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. You may go, oh, where's 3.0? Well, because we don't actually have 3.0 anymore in the industry. Basically, the Energy Star just said the country's moving forward. Anything that's based off of 3.0, we're going to just sort of sunset that. So that's sort of the minimum now is 3.1. So Ben, taking a look at this, the checklist modification, how are you feeling about it? Is this going to make our lives easier, harder? Is it going to make homes better or worse? What do you think?
In general, I agree with taking out the advanced construction techniques. I do think all of that will be brought in. I do think removing the advanced framing techniques might be a bit of a miss because it really clearly spells all that out on what is needed in order to comply, right? Most people are used to leveraging the advanced framing as their means for Energy Star compliance. And so not having that clearly spelled out creates like a bit of a gray area for providers and implementation on this. So I think from a overall program implementation, I think it's good that they're adding these photos. I haven't fully reviewed every single one of them. It seems like a lot of it is redundant with the minimum rated features. One of the ones to maybe call out that might be a bit of a pain could be like walls to porch roofs, right? Sometimes that's visible at rough, sometimes it's not. We have a lot of builders who get it right every time, but during how that's phased in construction may or may not be easily verified.
Yeah, it's interesting you point out the photos. I didn't even mention that, but that is another sort of big part of this is that sort of up to this point, the Energy Star program did not actually have mandatory photo documentation that extended beyond whatever the HCO that supports the program might require. So in the case of ResNet, the ResNet 301 standards obligate certain photos to be documented, particularly for things like insulated assemblies and performance testing results. So for that reason, that sort of meant that a lot of things that are explicitly Energy Star in nature, and I'll go ahead and kick off one that I think is kind of typical, would be bedroom pressure balancing. So the tests that we perform, everybody's been doing Energy Star should be used to this by now, but you basically set the air handler fan to the highest fan speed setting, close all the bedroom doors, and test under each bedroom door basically to ascertain a sort of minimal pressure balance difference between the bedroom and the main body of the house. And really, there was no obligation to document that. And so I'll just say, not to look behind the curtain too much, but we've had struggles with that as a provider because we'll go out and to go and do QA, and then we find that it's non-compliant, and that may be, and it may be like bedroom pressure balancing that isn't. It may turn out that, like, well, does that represent every single home in the entire neighborhood? Man, you do some QA work for BER. I mean, have you had any trouble as sort of a QA provider representative with sort of sorting out truth from fiction with Energy Star in the absence of a lot of these photos?
Yes, and I remember Energy Star reaching out to us a while back about, can you give us a list of maybe the potential things that you should have a photo for? And I would say that most of the raters who are diligent about things have been providing photos. They do it maybe even for their own work, but yeah, one of the things that we see so often is people not taking photos and thinking in their mind that, well, if a photo isn't required, then nobody's going to know if this isn't done. But then on discovery, yeah, it's just because there was no photo required, it's still a requirement. And I think moving to photos is a good thing. And if I had to say one thing to our rater base is use our portal as a free version of Dropbox, load it up with photos, put 100 photos for every house in here and document them for your own company purposes as well as for QA.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had a call about this yesterday with ResNet, trying to get some clarification on some things with the new QA app. And one of the things that ResNet Connect has decided to continue not to do is they're not going to require the minimum rated features that are not tied to Energy Star to be submitted, just like they really don't require. They require us to keep those documents for 3 years, but you're not going to be required to be uploaded in the registry, whereas the Energy Star photos are going to be required to be uploaded into the registry. So it just makes things a little bit more complicated. And there's also a difference in the time, right? So they'll be automatically deleted off the registry in 2 years, where ResNet's requirement is 3 years. So I thought that was kind of interesting, the difference in application and documentation of the photos. But still, I think it's a very good thing, right? Matt, you and I had a conversation about this just the week before last about some of these photos that are just, so now it's requiring, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, bedroom pressure balancing has been a challenge since the beginning of doing bedroom pressure balancing, and documenting it correctly and et cetera. So I think a lot of these things are a good thing, but I just thought it's different. Apparently they're going to require these. I guess Ecotrope is working on a way to require these photos to be uploaded in the Ecotrope for Energy Star. That's not going to be part of the app, and photos in the new ResNet app are going to be maybe never use app, or not for a long time. So again, I think it's a good thing, but I thought that's a good thing to point out as far as the requirements and things like that. So they will be required. They will be attached to the registry for about 2 years.
So yeah, so Erik, for you, seeing these new photo requirements that are part of the Energy Star program, are you feeling like that's a good kind of way to level the playing field for the industry and document our work, or are you seeing it as potentially being a challenge or a burden for you as a small to medium sized rating company?
No, I think it is definitely in everyone's favor. I remember when I first started doing new construction around 2012 and 13, I was only taking pictures of things I found wrong during like insulation inspections. So when a year later, when a builder would call back and say, hey, the homeowner is telling me that they don't believe we insulated the floor over the garage. You got any pictures? And I'm like, here, let me check. Well, I didn't take any pictures, so it must have been okay. So to where now, and we use CAM. I don't know if I can say company CAM on your podcast, but we've even created the mandatory rated features checklist through company CAM to where now my field team, they can't go and check the box unless they've uploaded a picture. And it allows us to even put in pictures that, okay, here's what we're looking for. And so then they know to compare that the picture's needed. Even through the last year, submitting things for QA, the 10%, 1%, we're still finding things that, oh yeah, no, I didn't yeah, I have that picture, but I didn't upload it because I wasn't following the changes and, you know, knowing what was needed as far as a complete QA and a mandatory rated feature. But no, I think it's definitely a good idea. My background is as a police officer and a paramedic, and the thing is if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So now I go by, if you didn't take a picture of it, it didn't happen. So
Yeah, and in addition to sort of the photos of the different programmatic requirements, we actually have to take selfies of ourselves at the house
yeah,
that are to be taken with each pre-drive one final for whomever is doing the inspection to basically say that they were there. And I think that, Sandy, if we
that might be going a little over the top. I think I don't know.
well, I mean, number one, I didn't create the programmatic requirements, and so I'm not going to defend or say they're bad per se. But Sandy, if there was a reason why this might have been included, why do you think maybe this is now included?
Well, I know exactly why. I mean, companies that, as you guys all know, I spent most of my career in the direct providership realm with big direct providers. And we used to require them to take a picture either in front of the dock box if you're in the South, or in front of the address, because a lot of photos are misused or reused, or there's illegitimate actors out there that do things that they shouldn't be done. And this is just another way of verifying. If you think about it, if you take a picture of yourself in front of a document box or in front of an address, right? I mean, it's supposed to be geo-stamped and timed. So, I mean, there's no doubt that that person was there at that time. So I know that's the reason why they did that. There's recently been some pretty big bombs dropped in the industry over the last couple of years where mass manipulation was going on. And I think this is, even though it's, some people don't like it, but I think it's a necessary step. And just think about this for a second. If someone's playing with radar of record or radar in the field kind of stuff, it's kind of hard to do that when you have a picture of the actual radar right there. So I think it's just another necessary step to ensure compliance. And I think a lot of this stuff all stems from this big action we all know about that happened. Millions of dollars worth of fines were issued, and I think it's a necessary step. I mean, there's no doubt that, unfortunately, there are bad actors in the industry, and I think this cuts down to a lot of that. So,
all right, so we're gonna have some bear-branded selfie sticks coming your way, Raiders, so that you all can snap a good old photo of yourselves in front of the house, the document for Energy Star. Now, Matt, you were bringing up something that you thought was interesting that was not changed in Red 14, that there was some talk that it might. So what kind of caught your eye?
So yeah, there was a lot of talk, and even Energy Star in previous webinars had said that they were probably going to go away from the credentialed contractor thing for HVAC and go to just 100% HVAC grading. And interesting that this came out and we still have credentialed HVAC contractors. I still think from a rater standpoint, having been a rater in the field, doing hundreds of houses a year, getting that paperwork from the HVAC contractors is difficult sometimes. And there are some outlying areas that we might serve where there are no available HVAC contractors. So I still think every rater in the country should be getting 310 certified in order to do Energy Star and do the HVAC grading portion of it, because there are points out there. And if we're trying to shave as many points as we can off of a house, an easy way to do that is HVAC grading. So there are still a lot of compelling reasons to do it. But in this version, we still have credentialed HVAC contractors.
Yeah, Erik. So I know that you've moved a lot to universal HVAC grading for a lot of your projects. How has that been working out?
It works out great, except for when my RFI in Fargo, North Dakota, is trying to do a rating, and they haven't even set the outside unit yet because it's the winter time. So, and I actually got a clarification from Energy Star, and it took them a minute to get back to me, but the ultimate decision was that if that was the case, then the house could not be certified until the unit was placed. And I mean, either way, so you couldn't actually get anything from the HVAC company, nor could you do anything with the 310. So I don't know if there is a solution for something
It's been an ongoing problem. Yeah.
like that. So yeah, so that's the one issue we have had in Kansas City. They'll still go ahead and set it. We can get some information from the HVAC group, and it's very very rarely is it to the extreme temperatures like today that we can't get at least the unit set and charged, and then information from the HVAC company.
Yeah, Ben, I'm interested in what you think about this. In particular, I'll say when we reviewed the Rev 14 process, we actually brought in a bunch of our raters more to review it on, I guess it's Rev 5 of multifamily new construction, really. And the sort of consensus amongst the raters within BER's providership that are focused on multifamily was that asking us as raters to take on a whole other burden of basically HVAC grading universally in multifamily was going to be too steep of a hill to climb, really, for us. And so, Ben, I believe you participated in that. How do you feel about basically leaving things the way they are in terms of these HVAC provisions?
I think it makes a lot of sense from like the overall industry perspective to leave optionality here. If you go into the version 3.3 reference, I believe it does have grade 1 as what the reference home has. So that is kind of in line with, I think, what the program wants to see. And if you don't do the grading, then you take an energy penalty, right? And so that would be so we're actually taking some airflow grade 1. So it's kind of across the board a little bit, right? But it is, I think previously it might have been all 3.
Grade 1, water grade 2, and refrigerant grade 3. Okay, interesting how they made that decision. You would think that Energy Star would want grade 1 refrigerant, but so be it. I suppose they're leaving some opportunity there on the table and us to potentially get some points if you go all the way to documenting the full process of 310 credentials. So, well, what are we?
Wait, I'm just going to say, Chris, that I'm very happy that they left both tracks in, and we were pretty adamant about that in our feedback. I think it's needed and necessary, right? Ben makes a great point. We need options. I mean, it's not always feasible in every situation. I think where they missed the mark, though, is the teeth in track B. There's still no teeth. So direct providers are going to be running around trying to get these HVAC guys to get design reports, and there's no teeth. And I think that's where they fell short, in my opinion.
Sandy, can you elaborate on that? So there's no teeth. They still haven't required the commissioning checklist, which I think is really like a big miss. And that is required in a lot of our rebate programs regionally. So that is like a good add. In general, we try to have all of our regional rebate programs.
Well, I say no teeth. So teeth, it's like there's no penalty. There's no, you know what I mean? I mean, I've chased around HVAC contractors for documentation for years. And you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait, and it holds up certification. And that's my point. It's like there's no place to go. I mean, how do you force this to happen? You go to the builder goes to the guy, and they never get back. I mean, I've seen this situation so many times. And it's like, to me, now, how they would do it, I don't know. Maybe it's a threat of taking away their credential. Maybe we need to go that far, putting a deadline. It needs to be at this point, period. And if it's not, then there's some risk of you losing your credential or something. But there has to be more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to piggyback on that and just saying, here we're making the rater document now 20 extra photos or something like that, and they already have a pretty substantial scope of work. You're telling me that that HQuido organization can't be required to audit 10% or so of an HVAC contractor's commissioning checklist? I mean, then what's the point of the HQuido? And so I think to your point, Sandy, that if you're leaving it under track A and track B, with track B being essentially a paper tiger, it's a pay-to-play system. There's the HQuidos they're supposed to train people, and I think they do maybe an okay job of that. I think we can debate whether or not that is totally adequate or not. But then the whole idea originally, when Sam Rashkin came up with this now close to 13 years ago, was that HWEDO was going to be sort of like a HERS provider for HVAC contractors. That's never happened. And so if we keep leaving it the way that it is right now, it's going to continue to be sort of, there's just a lot of room for error. Like, let's just take, for example, under track B, so the radar is still supposed to measure static pressure. Again, we don't compare it to anything. We just measure it and write it down. Okay, well, fair enough. I guess that's what we have to do. But the challenge with that is like, well, and Erik, going back to your experience with HVAC rating, if you do the static pressure method, there's a lot of room for messing that up because you have to have the fan speed setting correct in order to get an accurate reading with static pressure.
Right. Yeah, and that takes, and that's additional training. If you've got an RFI with no HVAC experience, then okay, well, how do I check the motor speed? What? Oh, okay, then here's the wire, here's the blue wire, here's the yellow wire. And then also, like you said, is all right, well, we're finding in Florida specifically, they use the HVAC closet as the return plenum. So now you're trying to stand inside this little closet trying to check it, and then it's over 1. Well, what's that mean? Oh, it just write it down. It doesn't really mean anything. But we're taking that information into a added service and then providing that information to the builder and the HVAC company. But some of the things with like even the 2021 energy code specifically, now the city of Kansas City has put the entire energy code on the energy raters, and they expect us to go into every house with our manual JS&D reports and, oh, well, this is a 4-inch, that's a 4-inch. All right, well, this is a 3-inch, that's a 3-inch. So, and
it's cool.
it gets
a
confusing.
big opportunity, but also a big challenge if you're not trained, to your point.
Absolutely.
And your point, like when Good Old Building Efficiency Resources did your team's HVAC rating training, we went through fan speed selection in the air handler.
Yeah.
And we had to sort it out sort of as a group to a certain extent because every air handler wiring diagram is a little bit different. And so to your point, to really understand what any of this stuff means, you're asking someone to be fairly sophisticated in their knowledge, which for that reason, in a lot of ways, your team moved for HVAC rating to just get the flow plates from the Energy Conservatory and you get a nice graphical report of how it's performing. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, so talking about potential misses, and let's go back here to reduced thermal bridging. Ben, you sort of said, well, I like elements of the reduction of requirements for reduced thermal bridging, but you weren't a big fan of basically the lack of sort of clarification or sort of calling out of the specific items that might pertain to advanced framing. Any other sort of missed opportunities or whatnot do you think under this particular section then?
No, I think I'm really looking at it from a version 3.3 perspective, right? And 3.2. And so I think cleaning everything up makes a lot of sense. The checklist was kind of getting a little more, all the air sealing details just don't need to be in there. These are all things that are necessary. Also, someone created some like ambiguity in the industry where we had to get like clear clarification on exactly what was Energy Star asking in certain areas to meet this. And so I get why they brought in the blower door backstop. And from my opinion, for version 3.2, and we'll say assuming for 3.3, you kind of need to be right around that blower door threshold for single family homes in order to be within the ballpark of meeting it, right? So if you're above, so if you're above like 4, really, you're really taking a real significant penalty there. So most of our 3.2 homes are in that 3 ACH range. So
let's deep that out a little bit more because I think this might be news to some people, but prior to Rev 14, this brand new programmatic document for at least homes, there was no mandatory airtightness backstop. Now, maybe your state might have had it through code or through perhaps a utility program that also mandated a sort of a maximum air leakage value. But for Energy Star, there wasn't. And I will take credit as being one of the people who convinced the EPA that it was necessary to have an air tightness limit for their homes program. So if you don't like it, you can come and jaw at me about it, because I was one of those people that repeatedly said this. Why? Well, because I would somewhat routinely, doing QA, see scenarios where homes were Energy Star, they met the ERI target and all the other programmatic values, supposedly had gone through the checklist verification, perhaps with some builder verified items, but they'd be leaking 7 ACH 50 still. And how is that possible if you followed the full checklist? I'm dubious that it is possible if you followed the full checklist. I think people may have misinterpreted some things, but the problem is now we have Energy Star homes. They're really pretty leaky still. And so people constantly got this one wrong. I would find a lot of people would go, well, I went to the national program requirements and it said something about air tightness values. And so doesn't that mean we have to meet that for every single home? The answer is no. Now, the national program requirements lay out reference home or reference design specifications, but that's what the reference home is modeled to, that then your ERI has to be better than it. And a lot of raters just didn't get that. They would just constantly say, well, don't we have to be 4 or 3 or 2.5? It's like, no, the answer is you do not have to. And up until Rep 14, you literally could have leaked 10 ACH 50 and technically passed the program. And so to me, now that we have 4.5 ACH 50 as a backstop or an alternative of 0.30 CFM 50, I think that it's going to hold everybody accountable better. It's also going to cut down on some gamesmanship. Ben, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. I know in your neck of the woods, there would be times where the decision to go for MFNC versus homes kind of came down to, for like townhomes, that you felt less confident that you could get to this 0.30 CFM 50 per enclosure area for a mandatory air tightness value. Is that right?
Definitely early on in the adoption of it, right? When we haven't done a lot of these and we didn't like fully cross-check, and we were going against Energy Star version 3.0, where you could easily hit 7 HCH and meet your target threshold, right? And so that wasn't to say we were obviously doing better, but it was just a big unknown. And so having that hard backstop was definitely something that made the two programs not in line. And so I think it is important to try to keep Energy Star homes and MFNC in line as much as possible. And so this definitely makes sense. And so I don't see this as being a big lift from my end, because I'm not really doing 3.1 a ton. Pennsylvania is adopting the 2021 energy code, but it's still under the 2018. So they can still do it. But a lot of our builders are either going for 45L with 3.2 or forgoing Energy Star or just going through our rebate program. So I'd ask Erik what he thinks on how his clients who are doing 3.1 right now, where this is going to become like a real mandatory thing, how's that going to kind of impact your discussion with your clients?
Well, and we had that discussion last year. Fargo, North Dakota is not moving forward with the 45L because of the windows. And our Vero Beach, Florida, they're not moving forward with 3.2 because of the windows. They don't want to currently go away from their aluminum framed windows to a vinyl to get under the 0.40. So I was pretty nervous, 350 houses a year that we were going to lose, but they see our services still providing critical information. So we still have them as a client. So that is good. But we went back and forth. We tried to find windows for them. We were at the builders conference in Orlando, meeting with building rep or window reps and stuff. So yeah, we lost two pretty good sized builders because of the change.
So what I'm hearing is that the air tightness isn't necessarily an issue per se, but meeting the fenestration requirements is. And for those
Yes.
who aren't quite familiar with this, basically go into the design review checklist, it is required under programmatic versions to basically have minimum compliance with fenestration performance values. And when you get to 3.2 and now 3.3, you have to either be in alignment with the 2021 or 2024 codes. I'll just take a look at the 2024 here so as to tease this out. So let's go to Fargo first. So Fargo's all the way up there, and well, shoot, is it climate zone 7 or 6? I think it's probably still 6.
I think it's 7.
It might even be 7. Okay, so to get down to the U factor of 0.27, you're saying that was a bridge too far for some builders there in Fargo. Is that right?
Yes. And I mean, their airtightness.
I haven't started to get into this a little bit more. And a couple episodes ago, Sandy and I were after about me taking a deep dive down the rabbit hole of window performance. And I'll just say to your builders, Erik, there are some decent options out there that don't really substantially change the window product itself. You don't have to get to triple pane windows in order to start getting better than 0.27. A lot of it just comes down to thicker low E coatings on the windows, and that can help to drop the U factor, I've come to find. But then let's go to your Florida project. So these are climate zones 2 or 1?
2.
Okay, so in climate zone 2, the 0.40, which us up north, when they go, oh, big whoop. That's not that big.
Yeah.
That's sort of like a bad performing double pane low E. But my understanding is that through discussions with you, it's not so much the thermal performance that's the issue, but in order to get to that level of thermal performance, they would have needed to have not a metal framed window. And basically the aesthetics of a vinyl window is considered to be sort of subpar down there in Florida. Is that correct?
Correct. They're pretty prominent builder in Vero Beach, and they have some other national builders building in subdivisions next to them, across from them. And when they go into their subdivisions, they feel that their clients are expecting a certain level of, I don't know, sophistication, maybe is the word. And then when they drive across to another national builder, they see a vinyl window product. And I think just the mindset is that they associate that with a lesser performing or a cheaper type of window, even though it may not even be. It's just all in perception. The air changes for this builder and for Fargo, I mean, they're under 2 consistently just because of the way they build. They're all foamed, attics encapsulated. So air changes has been great, but they just couldn't pull the trigger on the windows.
I think that's interesting. Now, Sandy, you're obviously down there in Florida. So what's your experience with Florida builders and window performance?
Similar. I mean, I would say that another big thing is the impact windows, right? A lot of the areas, especially like east of 95 or west of 75, a lot of the building codes require impact windows, and those impact windows don't usually make that performance level. So I think that's another large factor in it too, Erik, right? I mean, I'm sure you came across that as well.
Well, and their standard windows are a 0.57, 0.21, or a 0.53, 0.24. They do have, and I said, well, what's this window right here? It's a 0.38, 0.21 or something. And I didn't read the label, but they were all their picture windows or whatever. And I said, well, just nobody opens their windows in Florida anyway. Just make them all that. So, but yeah, no, it's the impact windows, and definitely comes into play.
I think that's
as well.
really interesting because all over the Northeast is all vinyl windows. So we've been able to get everybody to meet that or even lower.
Oh, absolutely.
With just double pane. So we've been able to keep a lot of builders with double pane and meeting this. And so what I also thought was interesting with 3.3 for the UA calculation, Chris, it might have actually gotten easier as the backstop, because I think the 2024 UA calculation, the total UA is actually easier. And then they're saying you have to meet 115% of it, which is at 15% easier. So,
yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because to me, that is one of the most critical takeaways from all these changes really is under version 3.2, you had to meet 100% of the UA calculation of the 2021 IECC. Again, there was some higher insulation values and things like Erik's that then in 2024 got sort of brought back down to reality, we might call it, to a degree. It depends on what your philosophy is, but here's the 2024 levels. We're back to R30, R38, and R49. So that R60, sorry, insulation, folks, but the 2024 committee decided that was a bridge too far. And so now, to Ben's point, not only do we now have to meet the 2024 ICC, which may have been a little bit easier, perhaps because of some of the way that the UA would be calculated, but then there's also a trade-off, which really comes out of the performance methodologies of the 2024 ICC. And again, I'm going to go ahead and give Bear some credit for this. Sandy, you and I, we made sure this wasn't even something that the program really said that it was considering for version 3.3, but we gave them the recommendation to bring back a building envelope trade-off option. Sandy, we had been kind of hearing that some national builders were just going to say, forget about Energy Star. And in the previous episode, one of our guests talking about the potential change in federal administration, was that going to affect the 45L and all? They suggested that because of having to meet a better thermal enclosure, builders were going to recommend to the upcoming, now the new administration, that we should just get rid of Energy Star as the benchmark for 45L because it was too difficult and not cost effective. So now we're at 3.3. Do you think that maybe assuages the concern of the national home builder community?
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, because one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, as you're aware too, HUD has required 2021 backstop on all homes for financing. Now, the biggest portion of HUD that will be affected by that is the FHA mortgage, right? Now, you and I have talked to builders, Chris. How many of these builders are selling 50% FHA mortgages? But here's kind of the twist I thought about this, being an old direct provider, right? Is that if 50% of your mortgages or 30% of your mortgages require a 2021 backstop, especially considering 3.2, but also with 3.3, because it's really actually better, right? To me, as a direct provider guy, this is a selling point to me for Energy Star, not a bad thing. And I'm going to tell you why. Energy Star is a compliance path to meet HUD's requirements.
Right.
But the kicker is you got a $2,500 rebate and a 90% product recognition in Energy Star. If I was a savvy rater in the direct provider side, again, how I would sell this is I would go in and say, look, you're going to need to meet this standard anyway. Why not use Energy Star, get $2,500 back for doing it, adding a few other things, obviously, ventilation, etc. Especially if you're in certain code areas, this is an easy sell. And say, look, you can get $2,500 back, and you're going to have the boom of a 90% market recognition of Energy Star, and I can teach your salespeople how to sell that. To me, this has been like a revelation, right? Because everybody's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I'm like, that's an easy pitch. So I think that that's something that we really need to keep in our pocket as raters, because they're going to have to do it anyway. Because many, we've heard as high as 50% of the mortgages that are being sold by national production builders are tied to the HUD and
So
FHA.
Sandy, well, I agree with everything you've said. What I would have liked to see for version 3.2 was more be in line with what they did for version 3.3. Because when we're doing like energy code analyses for 2021 IECC and then looking at Energy Star 3.2 as well, the UA column is going to look very similar to the Energy Star column with some additional upgrades, right? So to kind of promote that optionality within the industry, like I agree with the UA backstop, but maybe it shouldn't be exactly in line with the 2021. Would have been just like how they did with the 2024, would have been what I would have liked to see, but they had already, I get not being able to kind of like change something that's already been rolled out.
I mean, that's sort of what the EPA always says is that, well, I mean, number one, and just having kind of, talked a little bit, behind the scenes about it, it sounds like the program was very much encouraged, particularly, the insulation industry to maintain a full alignment with the 2021 IECC. And look, the program tried it. They thought that it was going to work. And obviously, it didn't quite work out in terms of mass adoption in the way that they had hoped to. So this is their way of kind of introducing some flexibility again. For those who maybe don't live and breathe UA calculations and what's the practical impact, what it means is essentially the total thermal performance of the building envelope in the majority of the country will be able to be essentially 15% weaker compared to that of the 2024 ICC. So if we take a look here at the insulation values, what's a practical potential ramification of that? Well, practical potential ramification is you're in climate zone 3, and instead of having a 2x6 R20 wall or R13 plus 5, maybe you'll be able to trade that off and just be able to do a standard old 2x4 wall with R15 insulation, and maybe you'll be able to get away with that. Going up to colder climates, climate zone 4 and 5 and above, maybe you're still able to do a standard 2x6 wall, and perhaps you have to upgrade to a blown fiberglass to get a little bit of higher cavity R value, perhaps. But you may be able to trade some of these items off and still comply. And going back to the change of programmatic requirements, reduced thermal bridging is no longer a mandatory requirement. So there's no longer this either have advanced framing or have continuous insulation on the outside of the house. I'm sure people feel different kinds of ways about it, but here's what I like about it. And again, I'm a building envelope guy. I would prefer people have better building enclosures. It's 2025. Come on, people. You're saying that we can't do any better. It's still in 2025. But one point is adding 1 inch of insulation board going to be not a deal breaker? But we'll figure that out. But the benefit to this is I've been to some sort of conventional builders' houses here in suburban Metro Detroit, and they're doing actually a lot of really good things. But they couldn't meet Energy Star because they didn't meet the full letter of the law of advanced framing, and they didn't have an inch of foam on the outside of the house. So there was no way to incentivize this builder to do any better because they didn't want to retrain their framing crew. They just, when I talked to them about it, they were just like, I don't know. I'm probably not going to do that. So they weren't going to retrain their framing contractors, even though it would have saved them some wood. They didn't want to add an inch of foam. And so basically now it's like, well, they didn't have any incentive to do any better. Now I can go back to that builder and say, okay, well, here's the deal. You can actually participate in the program regardless of your framing package. And we may be able to get you in the door for a tax credit. Now, you're probably going to have to level up in other ways, but sometimes I think that that's fair. Maybe builders start to make their homes more airtight and maybe add balanced heat recovery ventilation. And truth be told, as a consumer, I would probably prefer that over advanced framing. I'd probably prefer to have a tighter house with good ventilation in exchange for maybe a weaker exterior building closure. Matt, you're down there in the South. Tennessee is not necessarily a big energy code state. Now, you're not doing a lot of direct consulting work anymore, but going back to your days in sort of the Lansing, Michigan market, and you lived through the transition of version 3, was this difficult for you at all to try to get people to participate in Energy Star because there were just some poison pills like advanced framing and or continuous insulation?
Yes, yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head. That pun intended for framing. Yeah, builders, most of the builders that I work with, they wanted an easy button. They wanted to just say, can I just put in a better water heater? Can I put in better windows? Without having to monkey around with any of the envelope? And that's where actually I think looking at revision 14 and 3.3, I can kind of foresee that a lot of people are going to want to leapfrog 3.2 and go right to 3.3. I really see it. And unfortunately, it's not modeled in the software yet, so we can't calculate compliance to 3.3. took a look in Ecotrope and sent them an email to say, hey, what's your timeline for doing this? Because I really think, and maybe Ben and Erik can talk to that. I know we're still kind of digesting these changes, but I think I can foresee a lot of people jumping to 3.3.
Go ahead.
Sure.
No, you go.
I think to Chris's point, no matter, there's oftentimes we go into a home and the builder or the framer just misses on this, right? And we would have to kind of say you can't meet Energy Star and have a really difficult conversation. Now we can have a difficult conversation, but that is just better, right? We can take the energy penalty. We also and they also changed the same thing with slab edge insulation as well, right? We can not meet necessarily the letter of the law with the slab insulation as long as we meet the overall, I guess it would be the UA value and the ERI target. And so I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because oftentimes on a lot of custom homes or even some production builders, like sometimes they get really hung up on the slab edge insulation, and I don't want to fight their structural engineer on this, even though we see this across the board. And so this can just be a easier conversation we can have, that this is acceptable. We'll just take the penalty and kind of move on. We'll tell you what the best practice is and what we recommend, but let your design team kind of work it out.
Yeah, no, and I just to piggyback on Ben, with Kansas City on the Missouri side taking the 2021 unamended for their energy code, just by virtue of meeting the 2021, that brought most of our builders into compliance with Energy Star 3.1. Then now that we hit 3.2, they're not meeting the overall UA of their high performance fenestration and walls. So it kind of knocked him out. So I definitely see a lot of folks jumping and skipping the 3.2 and then going to 3.3. It just to touch on the attic insulation of the 2021 calling out R60. Well, then that created a lot of issues. Now they're having to change the way they're building their roofs, their attics, their trusses. So that created more expense, and our HBA up here was just all up in arms. But I actually Charla is going to do a presentation on KCMO at ResNet and all the trials and tribulations of trying to meet that code. I'm excited for 3.3 for sure.
Yeah, and I've advocated that perhaps we would need to reorganize the energy code so that the performance options go at the top and the prescriptive options go at the bottom, because I think that builders seeing R60, that was it. They didn't need to see anything else about 2021. They saw R60 and it was like, we're going to fight tooth and nail against this thing. Now, looking really quickly at version 3.3, it's not a freebie. We're talking about all the good stuff about it, but it's not a freebie, folks. Yes, there's some envelope trade-offs, but the reference design is all calculated against basically what it goes into the reference home here. And so the building thermal enclosure is still going to be really good for the reference design. You're going to have in your colder climates, the R20+5 level of insulation performance, better depth on slab edge insulation, window performance. This is where the EPA is buying a lot of their savings for version 3.3 is in fenestration performance. That's where it seems like they're going to be really driving a lot of the savings on the ERI. You look at the mechanical specs, and I'm not necessarily totally blown away by here. Modestly better air conditioners, modestly better HVAC equipment, but even that 95% furnaces have sort of been standard here for quite some time. Heat pumps, yeah, not really great heat pumps either. So if you're going all electric, honestly, that's a lot of savings. If you're willing to do an all electric house and put in a cold climate heat pump, you're going to get a lot of savings here. HVAC rating, they're expecting some improvement there. The ducts are 100% side condition space. I think that's been the case for a couple programmatic versions, but basically you're if you put ducts outside the envelope, you're going to have a hard time making that up. And once you start getting these really cold climates, then all of a sudden you have to start having balanced heat recovery ventilation. Water heating is, if you're doing gas, basically you're going to have a tankless unit, or you're going to be compared against a heat pump water heater. That it's kind of interesting and it's kind of weird. I don't know if, I guess this is intentional here, but every other climate other than climate zone 4C has a 3.3. UEF heat pump water heater, whereas everybody else has a 2.2. Not sure I quite entirely understand that, but I guess if you're there in coastal Oregon or something like that, you're going to have a little bit more of a burden of proof on water heating. Anyways, I'm not scared by this necessarily. Anybody freaked out about having to design against this? Ben, how you feeling?
On this, on paper here, it doesn't seem too bad at all. The HERS index of 45 that they threw out is, I think, in line with where it kind of needs to be. My notes had we were at, like, for single family, closer to a 49 for a 3.2. So going down to a 45 is in line, close to that 10% that they want. I'm a little nervous on where it's going to come out, right? How we're going to be able to claim this. I also think we're still seeing some wonky things with ecotrope in energy modeling. I still have gripes with duct leakage on how that changes. I think duct leakage should be more linear in how it performs in the energy model. Sometimes we don't see the savings as we drop it down that we'd like to see. Also with infiltration, there are some wonky things where it kind of seems to step down depending on your lower door threshold. There can be some very large discrepancies there that aren't often clear and aren't necessarily oftentimes consistent across product types. And then the last one for multifamily is the water heater and the recirculation. So Energy Star is just not really directly modeling recirculation water heaters for certain control systems, and we've kind of brought this to their attention, and they have agreed that it's an issue, but haven't been able to give us the timeline on it getting addressed. And so that could be another hurdle for 1.3 because of how fixed some of these larger multifamily buildings are, right? A lot of these mechanical systems kind of have their efficiency limits that they want to use. And so it will be interesting to see how Rosendaul gets fixed.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's a whole other can of worms. We kind of didn't really talk too much about the implications for MFNC, but there certainly are some there. Erik, how are you feeling about this? You think you're going to be able to potentially get your builders back in the game, maybe with 3.3, or you still think that the windows are going to block people's entrance?
Yeah, I'm pretty much dead in the water with Florida, that they were pretty adamant about the windows. For Fargo, there was a couple other hurdles the interesting part about my Fargo builder is they also build homes on the Minnesota side, which is an energy state. So they were building those homes over there with full-blown HRVs and all the bells and whistles. Required blower door testing, and then you hop across from Moorhead, Minnesota, back over to Fargo, and they really had no requirements from the city as far as blower door or duct work and things like that. So there are some other hurdles there that I don't think that they'll be able to jump over as far as some ventilation issues and things. So
right on. Well, hopefully a way to get people in the door who were maybe disinclined towards version 3.2. I'm just going to pour one out here for one thing about the program that went away that I think is sort of a shame. The water management requirements are no longer. The builder is not required to have a water managed building any longer through Energy Star. And I'm sure that the EPA's intention was, it wasn't even a checklist. Nobody was really checking it. But in my opinion, I believe that actually brought a substantial amount of value and credibility to the program, and I'm sorry to see it go. So it is. No more water management requirements. We'll have to go back and redesign our Energy Star training. It'll get a lot shorter now, I guess, because we're not even going to talk about making the buildings better water managed, which is, again, somewhat of a shame, but so it goes. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We talked long enough about all this, and so we're going to go ahead and wrap up segment 2. I really appreciate these guys coming on and rapping with us, and we're going to have them stick around actually right now for segment number 3. as you all can see here, I am wearing my BDR hat. I am not wearing my Lions hat because the Lions laid an egg on the national stage. And Sandy, now do you understand my pain? Now do you get it?
Listen, I'm a New York Giants fan. I've understood your pain for many years.
You Super Bowls here just like a decade ago. You don't understand my pain. That's what I'm saying. You have no way of understanding how a team could go back. We lost in 1991 when we were favored at home. Well, actually, we were on the road, but we were still favored against the Redskins back in 1991. Just to make our lives that much more tortured, we face, as the number 1 seed at home, the Washington Commanders, a terrible name, the same team, but an even worse name. And we lose to them in a stinker at home. You still...
I have a theory on this. I think that hit that Jared Goff took, he was never the same afterwards. And I'm convinced he had a concussion. I mean, think about this. He took that hit to the head. And then after that, he throws 2 interceptions and plays horribly. He's off on every throw. I think that they missed something there with him because he did not play Jared Goff game. So, I mean, that's my thought on it. I think he got hurt. And I think it messed up their chances. That's my opinion on it. But I wouldn't rule them out. I think that's a great team. And what this last year was the playoff, this year was the champion, the divisional game. Maybe next year is the time they go. You're still a very good team.
Yeah.
But I do think that Goff hit had something to do with it.
I think
really
you're
do.
right. I think he definitely took a dinger, and I'm not quite understanding how that's not a penalty. Everything else seems so penny-iny with the NFL, but you're allowed to totally ring up the quarterback unnecessarily.
If it was Patrick Mahomes, it would have been a penalty and an ejection and everything else.
Yeah, I kind of feel attacked by Chris's last statement. I mean, it's hard being the best quarterback in the world, probably the universe, and you could definitely tell that he's part owner of a soccer team because I think that's where he got his acting skills. But I mean, I'll call it like I see it.
Coach is calling it like he sees it.
Well, here's the deal. The Lions did not play their game. I'm not going to make any excuses for them, all right? The reality is that this comes down to coaching. And Sandy, I've said it before, Mas que no es que cerebro. Everybody loves the coach. I love him too. I'm a little bit less concerned about Dan Campbell. I still think he's ride or died. Ben Johnson, though, as our offensive coordinator, all I can say is to you, buddy, is bye-bye. See you later. It was fun while it lasted. He's off to coach the Bears as the head coach. And I am not crying any crocodile tears at all because instead of preparing for our game, he decided to go and pimp himself all around the league in order to get a head coaching job, and he laid a friggin' egg. Instead of following the plan that we've had all year long, which is primarily running the ball as well as pocket passing in the center, he decided to draw up plays that were completely unnecessary to take big shots down the field. Jared Goff apparently was recovering from food poisoning, so you already knew that your stud behind the quarterback was not 100% himself. He threw that first big pick 6 interception. He should have known at that point, it's time to go back to fundamentals. Run the ball. You have Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs has had a superlative season, the best season in Lions history as a running back, even better statistically than Barry Sanders. And you should have just given that guy the ball because he was moving the chains every single time he had a chance. But in the second half, they decided to go away from that. So Ben Johnson, ciao, dude, sayonara, not interested in you anymore. We'll move on to next season. But it's a bummer, obviously, as a Lions fan. But I guess we're going to go ahead and have to pick who's going to come up next. Erik, you got to be feeling pretty good about your chances, though. Is it time for the first ever three-peat?
I'm not real excited about Buffalo coming in next week. I think that's going to be a very tough game. Normally I would be there, but I'm going to be in Arizona instead, cheering on. Maybe we can all have a little watch party somewhere and cheer them on. But I'm nervous. I was actually a little worried about our game this past week, but I think we've got a real shot at the three-peat, especially now since Detroit's not there, but I hate to say that, and that's the COO of our group down in Florida was really cheering on Detroit as well. So
Ben, I don't know. Are you a big football guy or
Yeah,
not so
before
much?
Sandy and I are Giants fans, so I'm always cheering on the Lions because the NFC East, whenever they play each other, they just play like 500 level teams. They just totally play down to each other. So I'm not totally looking forward to the quality of that game, which is kind of all I have to look forward to in the playoffs right now, right? Is just some good football. So that would be my hot take on that game, is that might be a little ugly. It might be
I don't
ugly,
know.
but it'll
I
be
think-
close.
I think that the Commanders Eagles is interesting. I think if Saquon Barkley, who you and I both can't believe they didn't re-sign, if he continues on this streak of this MVP performance, I think they're going to be hard to beat. Jalen Hurts has almost become a non-factor. I mean, in a passing game, still a factor in the running game, but it's enough to keep him honest. I don't know if the Commanders got enough to beat the Eagles. I think they overplayed last week, and I think it's going to be hard to do that twice. Plus, the Eagles got a really good defense, right? So I think I can see the Eagles going. As far as the Kansas City Buffalo game, I don't know, man. Buffalo, tough team, man. I can see why Eric's nervous.
Yeah.
And Josh Allen, I mean, Mahomes is one and he's number two. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, the guy has played off the charts this season.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the better of the two games over the weekend, without a doubt. I got to cheer for Buffalo because I'm a New York guy and they're in New York. But no offense, Eric. But I don't think either one of these games. I think actually the Eagles have an easier route to the Super Bowl than the Chiefs and the Bills. I can't see the Commanders overpowering the Eagles, where I could see the Chiefs Bills game go down to the wire. It'd be a real competitive game.
Yep. Well, I am going to have to go ahead and throw my support behind my Great Lakes State sister city, Buffalo. Buffalo, similar to Detroit, similar weather, similar culture, similar rise and fall of our economies, and perhaps a rise again. So I got a lot of love for Buffalo. Hey, look, what everybody's decided for whatever reason on a national stage that they're just done with Kansas City. I don't agree with that at all. I think that Kansas City is a great team. I think they have a great coach. I think that they have a great straight shooter quarterback. And what's good about the politics? Let's put all that to bed and just get behind good football. And if there ends up being a 3P of the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm not mad about it. But that ends up happening. I think that they're an honest team. They don't deflate the ball in order to get ahead in life. And so I'm fine with it, Eric. But I am going to root for Buffalo just because they're a little bit closer here geographically. Ben, we're gonna have to say that you're an Eagles fan just because you're there in New Jersey, and so Philly's right across the border. Whether you like it or not,
My wife is an Eagles
Giants
fan.
fans hate the
My wife
Eagles.
is an Eagles fan, so I get plenty of Philly green.
okay. Well, there you go. So there you go. So you are an Eagles fan. Say, Sandy, we're giving you the Commanders, and so I'm gonna be mad as hell against your Commanders here. And so that's what we're thinking.
Look, I used to go to the games, the Giant Eagles games. The owner of my company in the previous life, many years ago, had season tickets right in the end zone. And I wouldn't even wear any Giants garb because I knew what was going to happen. I mean, and I've had some great playoff games there where Plaxico Burst caught the ball right in front of me. And I stood up and cheered like everybody's looking at me like this. So it's hard for me to have any love for the Eagles. It really is. Eagles have been a nemesis to the Giants for many years. I mean, I go back to Ron Jaworski, Randall Cunningham. They can go on and on and on and on. But the Commanders, I'm not a Giant hater or lover of them. So if you're gonna tag me with them, I'll take it. But I don't think they're gonna win.
And for me, my wife and I, we come together to hate the Cowboys. That's how our relationship works. So if you,
well, all of us, majority of parents, the whole world can lock arms in its hatred of Dallas Cowboys. Whoever thought they were America's team is dead wrong. Nobody likes the Cowboys, at least not anymore. All right, we're gonna wrap it up. Not long enough. Aaron, Ben, thank you so much. Appreciate you, fellas.
All right, Sam.
And we will check you on the next episode.